And just like that, within the matter of a few days, the Chicago Cubs are legit World Series contenders. Not that they weren't before that, but losing Tucker kind of hurt a little. We thought, when you thought there's going to have to be another bat added, and boy, oh boy, did the Chicago Cubs add a bat.
Yes, they did. And after, gotta adjust my headphones a little bit here, but it was after for those. So it was shocking, right, for them to have signed Bregman. However, frequent Cubs insider readers may not have been as shocked because I had written in the wake of seeing them, because if we recall the Tucker deal, right, and I wrote about this on Friday because the arbitration salary deadline was Thursday, and we saw that the Cubs not only went over with Justin Steele, right, who missed most of the 25 season with elbow reconstruction. They paid him somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, 200,000, 250,000 more than what was projected, which is kind of not their thing usually. And then, they had the Edward Cabrera trade, which kind of set some of this up. They paid him quite a bit more, like I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 750,000 more than what his projections were. Again, for someone who's had some injury issues. And if we recall, going back to the Kyle Tucker deal, the Cubs had come in shortly after trading for him, right? They literally just traded for Cabrera like a day or two before this. They undershot big time on Tucker and eventually ended up settling before they went to arbitration. But this was a decidedly different look for them to just go over. A lot of times they do try to come in a little under and get those discounts. And I had theorized at the time that going over there, if you could take the opposite tack and say, well, that just means that they're not going to spend somewhere else and they have a little bit left. But my thought was, hey, Jed's got more money in the budget than what I think a lot of people believed. And then, so that was what I was saying. And shortly thereafter, I don't know, same day, if it was even on Saturday, I think it was on Friday still, Jacob Zanola wrote that the Cubs are still actively involved with Bichette and Bregman. So we knew that stuff was coming in there. And then we see, so not only did they jump to a much higher overall level than we thought they would, not only did they get Bregman in on a deal, it's got a no trade clause, which, they've done before but don't like doing. There are no opt-outs, but they're also deferring $70 million of his contract, which is something they did some deferrals with Jay Hay. They did some deferrals with John Lester, but not $70 million worth. And that's enough that it should actually lower the contract value from $35 million AAV to maybe somewhere closer to 30 or 31. We don't know what the deferral schedule is, so we can't pinpoint that yet. But they may have done this, and if it's 30 or 31, at least for the time being, they're under the penalty level. So they're going to be so close to it that it still signals to me that Tom Ricketts has a decided willingness to go over this year. Knowing what all is going to fall off and knowing what this means competitively, and we don't know what the structure is going to look like with the CBA. I'll shut up. But this is just it signals a massive change in what we've seen from Jed Hoyer in terms of his aggressiveness and his willingness to kind of play with the deferrals and some of the new salary structures that are becoming more common, and also Tom Ricketts to really spend at a higher level if it means building a contender. And so I'm just it's awesome. I don't think I'm as shocked as other people, but this is a huge move for them.
That is an understatement. Yeah, I mean, let's just look at like free agent signings by the Cubs. I mean, definitely under Jed Hoyer, definitely the biggest free agent signing by far. I mean, like, it's not even close. What's the next biggest free agent signing?
Swanson got more money overall, but $2 million.
That just felt safe, though. That felt safe. It was predictable. It was like, this is kind of like, this is just one of those things where I think, we like to talk about the Cubs possibly doing this, that, and the other thing, and then it just doesn't ever happen. the Dansby Swanson thing, it felt like taking the lesser of the two or three. Or was it three shortstops that were in that?
4 shortstops because it was Turner and yeah. So I'm the two, because what 2 of them went to Texas, right? So it was those two and yeah.
Yeah, it's like whatever.
Whatever.
At the end of the
I'm
day,
old and I don't remember anybody's names anymore. But yeah,
I'm right there with you.
Corey
But
Seager.
that's yeah, Seager. There you go. But it felt like that was the Cubs kind of taking the cheap way out, right? Like that's what it's felt like the last many years. The Cubs definitely since 2017, 2018 ish time frame, right, where the Cubs the window is closing and all the things. This is definitely unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but I think when we've looked at this, there were, and I wrote this a while back too, because you know how much I like that's one thing that's when you put out a bunch of content for public consumption, like you're creating your own receipts all the time, and I remember looking at this, and again, I'm not saying I projected that they would definitely go get Bregman, but it looked like again they were going one of two paths, and one was trade for a starter and pay for a bat. The other would be pay for a starter and trade for or kind of sign a cheap bat, right? That's kind of where and once they pulled the trigger on that Edward Cabrera deal, then you're looking at it going, okay, there you got a dude for $5 million in Cabrera, who again is 20 to 25 million less than what it's going to cost to pay for a top starter. So you figure, okay, that flips over, and the fact that they traded away Owen Casey in that deal meant that you're not counting on as much internal improvement, right? I mean, I think we figured Moises Ballesteros will be the incumbent designated hitter at this point, but then you're kind of left with that hole. Yet you haven't addressed what happened with. No, it wasn't Correa. Correa was. We're talking about the shortstops. It's not Correa. Who's the other dude that Texas signed that then they just traded to the Mets for Brandon Nimmo? That's who the fourth shortstop was, who obviously played second base in Dallas, or Arlington. But this was one of those where they had the money there, and I think that's the aggressiveness. Like to me, the biggest thing of this is like how many times, and I have beaten this horse repeatedly, have we seen Hoyer fail? Marcus Semien, that's it. That was the other one. Have we seen Jed Hoyer be too passive in a lot of these moves? Like he'll stick around, he'll have these talks, and every single time the Cubs are getting outbid by someone, whether it's a team that's willing to defer more money to get the total value up while they don't like playing ball that way. Whether it's just they won't kick in an extra year on a guy, whatever. Like
it's these little things, these little
right.
tick-tacky things.
They're an also ran because they set this value, and so Greg Huss, one of our former, or I guess he's still a colleague in there, but used to write for us here at the site, and he had said something, and I was this way too, and I'm not nearly as high on Bregman as a lot of people are. I love this move, and I think it's great for the Cubs. Not a big Bregman, I don't believe, but I think similar to the John Lester deal, that's what this feels like to me. And
exactly.
This veteran leader, you're overpaying, I think, relative to what his production is going to be. Just like, I mean, Lester was very good, right? Finished second in the Cy Young, but he was not this dominant ace. He was very, very steady, very, very, very good for them. But what he brought was a sense of legitimacy and kind of this swagger and veteran presence that is worth splurging a little bit on. And so to me, to see Hoyer step up and go beyond, because look, I mean, I'm the first one to admit, when I saw the word that Boston was willing to go to 160, maybe 170 on Bregman, I was like, he better sign that now, because nobody else, the Cubs aren't going to beat that. and technically, the net present value is maybe closer to 150. So realistically, didn't beat it in terms of the value of the money. But that's where Hoyer managed to, I think, convince Ricketts of some of this and make this work. At least that's what I am believing at this point. And I'm sure we'll find out more a little bit next week at Cubs convention. There's going to be huge buzz there. But they were able to get that better value. If they can get him at that $30 million range versus 35, right, in terms of how it affects the CBT, they're able to fill out the roster a little bit more. They've got this guy that comes in and brings them legitimacy among not only Cubs fans, but the rest of the league, that this signals, just like the Lester deal did. When Lester signed with Chicago, that signaled to everyone that the Cubs are for real now. They're in this meaningfully to compete. And for me, that's what I think the Edward Cabrera deal kind of got there. The fact that they were willing to trade their number one overall prospect for this guy and put some risk there. But this one far more so says we are intent on not just beating the Brewers and winning the division now multiple times in the next few years. We're making another run at the World Series here in the next half decade that he's under contract. And I think that's what it should. Like that's what they're supposed to be doing. That's what we've all been begging them to do for years now.
It is. But listen, here's the thing though, is that this feels so different than what we've seen from Jed Hoyer. And I'm saying he's using ChatGPT. He went into ChatGPT. He typed in, he's like, here are all the constraints. Here's our salary. I have to say under the CBT, we want to sign these players. Give me some options. This is the chat. This is AI. The Cubs are using AI. It's official. No, don't question it. We know what's happening. And if they're not, they're foolish. And we know they're not foolish because this is just out of nowhere. It's very unlike what we've seen from Hoyer. And I mean, it's surprising in that way. Within like 4 days, the Cubs get a frontline starter and a great clubhouse guy, a great bat, a guy who could hit 30 home runs for sure, legitimately for the next several years at Wrigley, depending on what's happening with the wind.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is just it. And it feels like to your point with John Lester, he was at veteran presence. Yeah, he was good. He wasn't at the height of his career, but he had some really good years left in him. Same with Bregman. I mean, it's almost the exact same type of signing, and you've got a relatively young team, a little bit more mature, right? You got PCA, who God knows how good he's going to be at some point. And then you've got a lot of young guys who are still kind of like they're coming up. You got Alcantara. Like, we're not sure how he's going to play in this. You got Matt Shaw, and then Nico Horner. Like, we can get into that, right? Like, Nico's obviously a veteran at this point, but there are some young, talented guys that are out there, and this just and out of the conversation, completely out of the conversation, is Miguel Amaya. And I'm just telling you, like, he didn't play much last year because he was injured most of the year. But what we saw from Miguel Amaya, to me, in just a short time frame, was enough to make me very excited about the potential of what he can bring. And he's under team control through like 2030.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you think about that. So now you've got, not only Bregman, obviously Swanson's still under control for a while, PCA still under control and getting younger. They're going to have to figure out, that's Alcantara. They got to figure something out there because they have the possibility of, and we'll lead into maybe Nico Horner a little bit, but Horner's in his last year under contract. Ian Happ in his last year under contract. Seiya Suzuki in his last year under contract. I think all of those things are also contributing factors, let alone Jameson Taillon falling off. Matt Boyd has a mutual option that probably won't be exercised both ways. Shota Imanaga comes off the book. So you've got, right there, I think I just ran off 80 to 90 million that they have fallen off there. So even if they do exceed the penalty threshold, they're easily under it. But you got to figure Alcantara out because he and Casey, how long have we been talking about it? And I could go back 2 years probably and saying I felt like they were going to trade Owen Casey. I've been thinking that for a while. This, I think, doesn't say that the team felt he was expendable, but I think his value outwardly was greater than what Alcantara's is. However, we're looking at yet another guy when we talk about Velasquez and we talk, Nelson Velasquez, we talk about Alexander Canario, with a couple of guys who are these stud prospects who then the Cubs kind of let wither and die on the vine. And then they ended up having to trade him for cash, just to get rid of him, to DFA these guys. And so it's time.
Or they get injured and they never even make the team.
Right. And so that to me is like, okay, you had Casey and Alcantara, and it was all along, I think most of us, now a lot of people thought like, oh, get Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki to both waive their no trade clauses and move them and start the rookies. And it's like, okay, well, that's the most foolhardy thing ever. But you got to figure out now, Casey's not there anymore. Alcantara's you have to know this guy can either slot in now as our everyday left or right fielder after next year, or we need to figure out how to move him too, because otherwise this is his last year with an option with him. He was supposed to have been out of options and the Cubs were granted another one on him. But after this year, he's out of them. So you can't just bounce him back and forth anymore. You got to go somewhere with that. So I do think that's big. And then I think, the next shoe to drop, if there is one, and Jeff Passan believes they're going to listen more on Hoerner, which I think would be a mistake. My thought is you roll with this year, keep Hoerner there at second, keep Shaw as a super utility guy to allow him to come along. If you can't work out a new deal with Hoerner and he happens to leave, Shaw can slide over to second base. You've already got that part figured out. If you can work out something with Hoerner, maybe Shaw gets traded. Right? He's probably going to bring back a better return due to his prospect status and the fact that he's under very, very cheap club control versus Hoerner being still cheap, but only 1 year of control. But then that comes down to the value. Does Hoerner see himself and his camp see himself being able to hit free agency as a shortstop, in which case he's going to command more money? But I think his value to the Cubs mutually is greater than realistically what it would be, because whether it's as a second base or a shortstop, he does not have the power that guys need to have. When we talk about those four, when you talk about Trey Turner, Marcus Semien, Corey Seager, and Dansby Swanson, all of them have markedly greater power than what. And I'm gonna like Hoerner's value is tremendous because he's such a great all-around player, but he's among the lowest in the league at either position when it comes to hitting for power. This isn't the 80s anymore. He's like a throwback type of a guy, that middle infielder who's just does everything well, but doesn't hit for power. Second baseman didn't used to hit for power. That's how it worked. But how does he value himself? I do think it's going to be very difficult for he and the Cubs to come to an agreement on what his value truly is, given what some of these deals are. And that makes it tough for me, but I do think trading him would be a big mistake right now after all the momentum they've just established. I think you have to keep him. You need to have your best team right now on the field, and that means keeping Nico Hoerner. How that plays out beyond this year, I don't know, but I would rather see them lose him to nothing other than a qualifying offer than to trade him and then have to hope that Matt Shaw produces enough value at second base to make that worthwhile. I don't like that risk.
Yeah. Well, and it gets real tricky when you talk about trading Nico Hoerner, because like, as you mentioned, and laid out real clearly there, is that this value that Nico Hoerner has to the Chicago Cubs is well beyond what you can see on the stat sheet. Right. And what he brings to the clubhouse and what he just as a steadying force in that lineup. I don't know that translates to value in a trade as much as the value that he brings as a leader to the Chicago Cubs.
Yeah.
And so I think that if the Cubs do or would trade him, I think a lot of fans are going to be like, that's what you're trading him for? I don't think that the Cubs would be able to go out and get the value back that the perception is that he brings to this team.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I think, the team that would trade for a guy like him, because he's a rental status, right? He's not going to a rebuilding team.
He's not going to change your team. He's not going to win you a World Series. He's not going to,
Right. So he could only go to a contender, or that's the only team that would make sense to acquire him, right?
Yeah.
So if
he's not going to the Diamondbacks,
right? If that's the case, they're not trading you anybody unless it's some kind of challenge trade, right? Where they've got a redundant, and I'm not saying Nico Hoerner is redundant, but for the sake of our purposes here, for the sake of brevity, we'll just put it that way. Let's say they have someone in there, maybe it's an outfielder, right? They've got another guy and the salaries kind of match up. And you can, although the Cubs, I think if they were to make that move, the one thing they would be trying to do, and this is where it would really suck and where I really hate it, is if they want to make sure they have a buffer underneath the CBT penalty threshold. Well, Horner's 11.67 million AAV. So if you did trade him in what would effectively be a salary dump, I can't imagine that's the case, because what we've seen, let's give, at least for now, I don't want to, I know a lot of people are like, oh, Ricketts is just cheap, so that's the only way he would have okayed this. I don't think that's true. I don't think this is something where Hoyer would then have to go and flip, because again, to me, we're talking about the value, and I think the projection for Bregman is something like 4 WAR, right at a 4 even. As you noted, anybody they would get back more than likely would have to be kind of a lower level prospect, someone who's probably not going to impact the team at all this year, if not for 2 or 3 more years. So you really would only be doing it to slash payroll. You're also doing it, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face, because again, the reason you went out and got Bregman was because, not that they didn't trust Matt Shaw, but the developmental ups and downs are such that counting on him as the cornerstone of a World Series contender is probably not something they were willing to do. It is definitely not something they were willing to do, right? They went out and spent $175 million to get Bregman to do that. So if you then go ahead and flip Nico Horner out somewhere, a 5 WAR player, you could put yourself upside down in terms of the value equation for what these players are actually going to contribute. And again, WAR, I'm oversimplifying things to a tremendous degree here, right? But those are kind of similar players. Bregman obviously has a lot more power, but Horner has much more speed. There's other things he brings to the table there from base running perspective and his defense at second base. And so I don't see a world in which the Cubs get better by trading. And again, I see a world in which they very easily become worse by trading Nico Horner. You ride that out. They've shown a comfort level in the past of letting these guys go to free agency and do the qualifying offer. But I do think if they were able to work something out, they can get an extension going with the new money kicking in next year, so that they're not actually impacting their CBT level any further than what they would be, right? If they were to start an extension that starts this year and they add new money to it, now they're further into the penalty. I think they can still work something out with him. And if they don't, again, and I laid this out in a previous post, I understand why there might be a wide gulf in what the two sides believe his value is moving forward. But if that's the case and he walks at that point, cool, because then guess what? You've had a lot more runway for Matt Shaw serving in a utility role to know, do we trust this guy as our everyday second baseman moving forward with Alex Bregman over at third, or do we need to now go out and find another solution instead? I don't like the idea of parting with this, of moving either of them. I don't like the idea of moving either Shaw, while I am not super enamored with his kind of some of his outside off the field exploits. But I think you keep them both, because that's what makes your team best. Like, you can't just part with a guy just to have to save some of that salary at this point, right? That's not how we're playing.
It can be viewed as a tough situation, but boy, is it a great tough situation to be in. I do think if you're holding Shaw and Horner up side by side, personally, I'd rather go with Shaw. And I'm not saying today this year, but I think in the long run, Shaw's got a lot more potential. In the second half of the season, he had a 522 slug, right? 522. We didn't see that from Alex Bregman last year for sure, but the only time Bregman's been above that was the 2 seasons in which 2018 and 2019, where he was 8 WAR basically. And so Matt Shaw flashed in the second half. He really showed, I think, what he could be. And I think in that second half, he lived up to the hype. There was a lot of hype from not just Cubs players and Cubs managers, but nationally, of people who've seen Shaw play in the minor leagues and were saying, this is the guy, he's legit. And we saw that. And so I just think there's a lot more upside with Shaw, and he flashed it in the big leagues. And so, like, if we had to give one up or another, I personally would much rather see Nico go. I'm not advocating to get rid of Nico, but I'm saying if the choice is between Nico or Shaw, we'd be foolish to keep Nico, only because, to your point, Nico's a free agent at the end of this year. Shaw is under control for many years to come. And I think he's ultimately going to end up being a better major league player than Nico Hoerner with a whole lot more power. And so I just think from that perspective, yeah, but would it be great to be able to keep both of them there? Sure. But my concern is that Shaw needs at-bats.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we can't have this kid sitting on the bench. And
but I think
he will get at-bats.
Yeah, he'll be able to rotate around. I mean, I think, you think about how many times have either Hoerner or Swanson been fully healthy for a full season, right? So that alone, one or the other, Shaw can, if Swanson needs a day off or if he's a little nicked up, you move Hoerner over to short for a few games. Shaw's playing second. I think what we'll see, Shaw becomes, I would say if they could even figure out a way to get him some time in the outfield, he becomes more of the Zobrist of this team in terms of his usage, right? And again, to your point too, is what you're making. We look at this as how do you maximize for the present without mortgaging the future? And to me, that's you keep both of these guys because you give Shaw a little more runway. You give him time at some of these multiple different spots and let him kind of play around, right? He gives Bregman a break at third. He can give Nico a break at second. He can play there a few times. He can DH once in a while if you need that. So just keep giving him, and maybe you give him some time in left or right every once in a while, depending on how that works. But Nico Hoerner is the better player and the more impactful overall player right now. That's unquestionable
for sure.
Shaw is
that we know. I mean,
right.
We think
as of
we
right
don't
now,
know.
Right? Overall,
we don't know what happens. Shaw's got the ability to shove. In 2026,
right? I mean, he's got way more power. He is very fast, good base runner, and we saw that he can play really, really good defense over at third, which means he should be a more than passable second baseman. And so again, for me, it's like, hey, let's max this year by using both of them, and there's no reason to force the future, right? There's no reason to make a decision that forces you into a decision one way or the other. A decision that forces you into a decision that forces you into a corner of where, all right, this person now, because if you trade Shaw and you don't extend Nico, they're both gone. If you trade Nico and Shaw doesn't develop offensively, and that happens this year, or it takes him a while, now you've hurt yourself this year. So to me, I'm like, hey, you've got a tremendous insurance policy. Have them both. If you don't work out an extension with Hoerner at the end of the season, Shaw slides in there. You're paying nothing for that replacement, and you can be a little bit more confident that that's who you've got. I mean, to me, that's by far the more responsible decision. But if there truly are any additional financial implications, if that's one of the things that if Ricketts said to Hoyer, he's like, yeah, I'm gonna green light you to be able to go spend what it takes to get Alex Bregman, but you cannot be in the penalty. And if that's the case, the Cubs right now, if the estimates are that Bregman's AAV will fall 30 to 31 million. And as of their last few signings and all the other stuff, the estimate on Roster Resource on Fangraphs, which is by far, I know a lot of people look at Spotrac or Cott's contracts. I have found Roster Resource to be by far the most accurate and the most proactive in terms of getting these guys updated. I think they had around 31.5 million. So if you're talking about a buffer that's only $500,000 to $1.5 million, that's gone with the incentives that some of these guys will reach, right? For different innings or other things like that, bonuses will get paid out. So that's not nearly enough of a buffer to keep you below. Now, if they go over by a little bit, I don't think that's that big a deal. But let's say if Ricketts did set that as a hard cap, if he is saying you by no means can you go into that penalty, then the Cubs have to shed salary somewhere else. But again, I think that would be a wildly irresponsible move to make, to say now we have to, because again, trading Shaw nets you next to nothing. He's $750,000, under $1 million that he's making. So that doesn't give you any more of a buffer against the penalty. trading Hoerner would be the only reasonable way to do it. And again, doing so mainly with the motivation of saving money and not hitting the penalty, I think that's a really stupid way to conduct your off season if that would be true. And I don't think that's true, but or let's hope it's not anyway.
Let's hope it's not. I think where I see Matt Shaw potentially on the bench and Alcantara potentially on the bench, that's where I don't see how that works. Like you don't want those guys sitting on the bench, not getting at bats, regular daily at bats. And I know there's going to be some injuries and some things like that are going to happen. And so maybe these guys do end up getting more regular at bats, but I don't want to turn Alcantara into a Brennan Davis situation. And it kind of feels like it's getting close to that. Like, I mean, he's gotten a little more. I think he's been up. Did Brennan Davis ever make it up?
No.
With the Cubs?
No, because he kept getting hurt.
And yeah, and so Alcantara, at least he's been up, right? He hasn't really done anything that makes you go, whoa.
Other than that time when Matt wore the leopard print shirt with the cheetah pants or whatever.
Yeah. But that's not, there's no war for that. And so, at the end of the day, it feels like he's kind of like Alcantara, especially, is just kind of like sitting there. And then Shaw could just kind of be sitting there. It's just, yeah, I don't know how it's all going to work out. But you, as Carter Hawkins 13 says,
it's the real Carter Hawkins right there.
It is. Look at this. We don't
do.
want them dying on the vine. Very well put. And so, yeah, I mean, that's my biggest concern, is that you set yourself up and then suddenly you've got one or two guys who are pretty big assets right now. And listen, at the end of the day, that's all this is. Every single player is an asset, whether they're in the minor leagues or the major leagues. And that's the reality of the situation. We could have fun watching them play baseball, but from a management perspective, you have to manage your assets. And that's what the Cubs are doing here when they traded for Bregman, and not Bregman, for
Cabrera.
The pitcher, yeah, Cabrera, and you're managing your assets, right? I mean, you're getting a guy who's a potentially great pitcher, who's a number one, number two guy, and you're getting somebody who can play right now. With Casey, yeah, he played a little bit, but I mean, we don't know what he's going to be. We don't know who any of these guys are going to be. Matt Shaw may not be anything, and so they're managing to win. Like, I'm just impressed that the Cubs have actually done what they've done. Dude, spring training is going to be lit.
Oh, spring training, like Cubs convention now, between the Cabrera trade and the Bregman signing, like all of a sudden, right? Because there was a real, but and I feel like we've manifested this, just like we all manifested, not you and I, but we, the royal we, the Tucker trade last year was kind of like, hey, let's make this happen, right? And I mean, Brendan Miller, again, friend of the site, had posted something a few days before even the Cabrera trade, and it was a picture of, it was Michael Bush, Nico Horner, Dansby Swanson, Edward Cabrera in the middle, and Alex Bregman over at third, like their heads on this kind of like a Mount Rushmore thing. And then sure enough, within 4 days of that going up, or 5 days, it happened. And to see them go out and aggressively make these moves. And like you said, there were so many people, and it became evident very quickly when the Cabrera stuff started moving that Casey was going to be part of it. Right. And it's funny to me. I think, again, we went, if you've been a fan for a while, you're familiar with, I mean, dozens of washed out prospects that never made it, right? We could go Jake Fox, right? We could talk about Brooks Kieschnick. We could go into any number of other guys back and forth, Junior Lake and Felix PA and whatever, who did a little to some extent or another, but then never truly turned into what people were hoping they could be.
Yeah.
But then 2015 kind of went and ruined all that, because it's like, all right, you're going to call up Chris Bryant. He's going to be the rookie of the year. You're going to call up Addison Russell for, obviously there's some problematic stuff that happened, but very successful. You're going to bring Kyle Schwarber up out of nowhere, and he's going to become a monster. Like, everybody they called up. Now, how much of that was because they came into a veteran-laden environment with a lot of guys Oh yeah, Braylon Marquez, right? That's the latest one. And Brennan Davis, right? How many of these guys have we seen? And
So
I
many.
mentioned earlier, I said the same thing. And so I don't know if Carter was listening at the time, but I had used the phrase withering and dying on the vine, talking about Velasquez and Canario. The Cubs have had a history of hugging these prospects so tightly, right? Of doing it. It's kind of like if you take a kid, you do everything for them, and then you send them off into the world, and they don't even know how to like go to the grocery store. You know what I mean? They don't even know how to pump their own gas because they never had to do that. And so it's like the Cubs just hold these prospects until finally they don't have any options left, and they haven't proven themselves. And by the time they get up to the majors, they get such a small sample size, they can't do it. They've never struggled. And now they end up being nothing, and the Cubs have to DFA them or trade them for cash considerations.
Well, and Theo Epstein was like a major offender when it came to like prospect hoarding, right, and like prospect valuing. But he'd also say, listen, these guys are here to be able to make the big league team better. Didn't really do a good job of kind of following through on using prospects in that way, except for bringing them up to the club and making them really good and winning 2016 World Series, obviously. But beyond that, it was like, there were some things and moves the Cubs could have made with prospects that they didn't. And it really ended up biting them in the long run.
Or even,
you don't want to get in that situation.
Yeah, realistically, like I know everybody likes to bag on Jed Hoyer for non-tendering Kyle Schwarber, although, that's pretty revisionist history, even though, again, I don't think it was a great move, but when you looked at where they were from a competitive landscape and kind of what the season he was just coming off of in 2020, which was just awful. He had a couple, it was tough. To me, the bigger error was not trading him when they could have right after the World Series.
Yeah.
When his value all
and that's my
point.
point.
That's
my point. There were some offers for him, and there were people that wanted him.
Yeah, well, and
he could have gotten a haul.
I just talked about Alexander Canario, but what about the other half of that trade? They traded Chris Bryant to the Giants. They got Alexander Canario and Caleb Killian, both of whom are now gone from the organization for nothing. I mean, they got they traded Canario for like cash considerations. They didn't get anything for Killian, and neither of them worked out, right? Neither. And so look at the Yu Darvish trade, right? Casey was the only one of those prospects who even remained in the system up until that point, and now they went ahead and flipped him. But then a lot of people, they get this hype about these guys. Like, how could you trade him? He's going to be the next great. And it's like, you don't know that. He's got just as good of a chance. The projection for him from Fangraphs, like the oopsie projection stuff, has him at like a 101 WRC plus. That is 1% better than average.
You draft prospects, you trade for MLB talent.
Yeah.
Period. Don't trade for prospects. That's what the Miami Marlins do. That's what Tampa does. Not the Chicago Cubs.
Go get somebody. And I know, like, is there a ton of risk? Like, people seem to, I don't know where this comes from, that like any prospect is a guarantee, right? Like, they got Jackson Wiggins. Oh, you can't trade Wiggins. How many pitching prospects have we seen flame out? Not just with the Cubs, but anywhere. But you can't sit there.
But really, I don't want them to trade Jackson Wiggins.
Right. No, I don't either, because of how the system
really
is set
legit.
Up. He does, and it could be, and that's where it was so interesting to me. Again, the risk they took on Bregman, while very different, financially and the player profile, to me is very similar with that aggressiveness they took with Edward Cabrera, who has had 11 stints on the IL, who has only gone over 100 innings once, right? Who had a sprained UCL late last season. He came back from it, pitched a couple games. He's never gone under the knife. So there's that. But, a lot of people, but everybody's, his risk is injured. But I got to tell you, folks, right? I posted this in one of the rundowns. There's a really great piece of research that this gentleman, whose name escapes me now, it's in there and you can see it. But last year, 39.1% of all major league pitchers that were used, all across every team, had experienced Tommy John surgery at one point or another in their lives, at least one. So 40% of the league, 40% of these pitchers have had Tommy John, and that number is only going up. So I understand that the greatest predictor of future health is past health, and this idea that Cabrera is probably not going to be suddenly the healthiest person in the world. But what about Matt Boyd? That dude had hardly pitched. He hadn't gotten to 100 innings in several years. the Cubs made him their biggest signing or early signing. They jumped the market to get him, and look how well he did, right? We can look at Justin Steele, who I know is coming back from injury now, so kind of a tougher example. But Steele had a terrible time trying to stay healthy and had TJ surgery with the Cubs in 2017 as a prospect. He barely even got anywhere. Cade Horton had Tommy John in college, barely pitched in college, was hurt both of his first 2 years with the Cubs in the minors, got hurt at the end of last year too, right? But this is, when we're looking at pitching, there is such a decided non-zero injury risk there. There is a very present injury risk that to call somebody a risk because they've been hurt before, to me is really, it's not
counterintuitive.
Right, it is, because like anybody you could trade for the healthiest pitcher ever. He's still got a very high chance of being hurt at some point.
Exactly. And so that's where you look at a player that's had some injury history and that is in the process of overcoming that injury history. I mean, to me, that's a good thing because, hopefully if they've gone through the proper rehab and they've focused on building up strength in the areas in which they had weaknesses, you can go forward and have a very successful career as a pitcher coming out of what you want to say is an injury history early on. A lot of to your point, a lot of these pitchers go through that. And so getting it kind of out of the way isn't a bad thing. And listen, at some point in the season, I'm just going to say, I think Jackson Wiggins is going to be, in Chicago.
I think
I'll be surprised if he's
but
not.
yeah. I mean, unless, again, barring injury or something else, and we've seen those things come up. I mean, I could see him kind of which I think the idea with, we saw how many injuries there were last year, which is the only reason Cade Horton came up as early as he did and continued to pitch as much as he did. I think their preferred route with him would have been more similar to what we saw with Justin Steele, where when he first came up, it was in more of a relief role, kind of break him in that way. And Adbert Alzolay was supposed to be that same way, right? Obviously, he ended up moving into a closer's role, but they wanted to use him as a swing man and work him into that rotation. I think with Wiggins, barring another kind of series of long injuries to some of these starters who are there, ideally, I think that's what they would do. Bring him into spot start somewhere, whether it's a doubleheader game or one of those where they've got kind of a really dense schedule for a few weeks, or you bring him along late, get him those relief innings, kind of get his feet wet a little bit, and then, whether you send him back down to stretch back out again, and then kind of get that, whether for the playoff run or whatever. But I think you want a guy like that. You limit that exposure early, put him in some advantageous situations, let him get used to it, let him soak in the atmosphere, and then he can really go after it, come September, maybe October.
Let me ask you a question here. What do you think? Are the Cubs done? Do they have, what other moves? I mean, outside of like maybe something with Horner or Shaw, which to your point, like I'd rather just kind of, see how that plays out. And mainly because I don't think you're going to get the trade value for Nico Horner. And so like, are they done? Like, what else do they have left to address?
I mean, to me, it feels like they're done simply because of what we've been discussing about the salary, so far. I don't think they want to go into the season already being over, right? Yeah. I think they want to look at, if we go over because some dudes earned their bonuses and performed well, whether that's some of the pitchers and everything like that, I think we could see that. Unless they go out and make another trade, like you said, to be able to bring somebody in and possibly reduce the payroll while also kind of bringing somebody in. But if you look at it and you figure, okay, you've got your two catchers, you've got Ballesteros as your DH, you've got Alcantara as the backup, kind of the fourth outfielder. I can see them again. Maybe they get a minimum deal, or they have somebody who came in on a minors deal who kind of breaks camp with them. Do you go out and try to find the Palatine pounder on a minor league deal with invite to spring training? And, there's Mike Tauchman as kind of your fifth outfield guy. They got the bench bat, former Yankees prospect dude who was overseas for a while. They brought in for $1 million or whatever. But, if it's him and Alcantara and Shaw on your bench, I feel like that's fairly strong. We saw them, the first several moves they made, guaranteed major league moves, were were for the bullpen. I mean, I think they're pretty well set there. There's a bunch of guys they'll bring in. I'm sure Tread Athletics is doing their pro day. They call it a pro day. It's all weekend. I'm sure the Cubs are going to continue to farm that as they have with Tyler Zombro and his connections there. The rotation is pretty well set at this point. They've got a lot of depth there when you consider that Colin Ray is back. You got Javier Assad still there. So
it'd be interesting to see how that plays out, right? Because there are a lot of guys. You may have a six-man rotation,
which they may have to do. Like once Steele comes back, how do you work him back in? And he could be back by May or June. And so I think there's plenty of depth. Cabrera gives you a lot more upside, especially with Horton already there. And this is like something that I was pointing out, that the fact that Cabrera's changeup averages a little over 94 miles an hour, which is harder than the fastballs of every Cubs starter other than Cade Horton, which is wild to me. That says a lot for how he throws his changeup as well, right? Like it's that power change. And then as our buddy Carter here brought up, Jordan Wicks. Jordan Wicks is just hanging out. There's another dude, right? Prospect who has looked like a quad A guy, looked pretty terrible last season, but I wrote about this. He's been at Tread working on his curveball instead of doing, so normally it'd be a spike grip, right? So his finger's on it and he spikes he'd have the pad or the nail of his index finger. He's gone to a stacked grip. So that index finger is off the ball entirely. And with that, when he had been using that spike grip, he was really trying to push out, and his curveball would kind of have that, they call it a bump out of the hand. I should do it with the left hand, right? He's a lefty. And there'd be that bump coming out of there. And so he throws a slider and a sweeper, both of which are flatter in terms of their horizontal movement, right? Or I'm sorry, their vertical movement. They stay along that horizontal axis, and they don't have a lot of depth, either one of them. Well, that curveball got pretty decent depth, but it did so, you could tell, right out of the hand, because it had that bump and a different spin profile from his slider or his sweeper, and therefore it was not effective. So we're talking about a guy as a changeup specialist. He deals very well with right-handed batters, but his splits were so bad in the wrong direction. Limited sample, but lefties just tuned up on him because that curveball was ass. And that's oftentimes what you'd use. Generally changeups are opposite-handed hitters, and then the curveball is a little bit more effective at neutralizing like-handed hitters. Well, when your curveball sucks, and so if he can get that, and he kind of scrapped it, didn't throw it nearly as much, but if he gets that, and this one appears to have better depth, better overall movement, and it's coming in instead of that bump out of the hand, and you can really tell, oh, yeah, that's a curveball because it moves differently. It's a little flatter with that late perceived break. If that's something that he can really harness and actually make that jump to be effective, something we never saw from Caleb Killian, right? You can look great at AAA, but it doesn't matter. You can't do it at the majors. That gives him, at the very least, a depth piece and possibly a guy who another team's going to look at as a trade as well. So I think there's lots of options there, but they have tons of depth in the rotation at this point.
Yes. And a lot of upside, I think, is basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of things that could break right. There's a lot of things that could go really, really well here. Luke Little, who knows what's going to happen with him, right? I mean, Ben Brown, is he going to be able to come back around, right? A lot of potential there. You've got Daniel Palencia, right? Porter Hodge, and I'm assuming Palencia is the closer.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, there's a lot of kind of like, who knows, right? Let's see what happens. But of the things that we know, super exciting. Of the upside, really exciting. I mean, this year is really like, it couldn't be set up for a better, more exciting year. I'm so stoked. So stoked.
Yeah, and I think that's what we've seen here. Cabrera decidedly raises the ceiling for the rotation. Alex Bregman, I don't think, raises the ceiling so much for this team as he does raising the floor. And I think that's the one thing that we've seen kind of missing. Like last year, very up and down team, right? We saw them go through periods where they looked like the best offense in baseball. And then unfortunately for a lot of the later first half and certainly through a good chunk of the second half, we saw them look like one of the worst offenses. And I think what they're building toward, and this fits Hoyer's general profile, right, is that they want to be more in the middle. And just they have strong defense up there. They have better depth across the pitching staff, better depth throughout the roster in general in the lineup, so that, are they going to go out and lead the league in home runs? No, but they've reduced their strikeouts. Their contact rate is going to be a little bit higher. I do think they're going to use the gaps well. They're going to run the bases well. They're going to play strong defense. And so I think you have a team that certainly is not immune to the swings and the ups and downs that we're going to see during the course of a season, but one that I think can actually go out there and not suffer through as many of those droughts as what we've seen from them in the past, and kind of going through those tough spells to where they're going to be able to beat you in a variety of ways. And I really, really think that is going to be a better brand of baseball to watch, even when they're not at their best. Because there were times last year where it was rough. And some of those, like when Tucker was slumping and when Shaw wasn't hitting well, when some of these, Happ was going through some struggles there, Suzuki would have some from time to time. And so it's like they were either all in the dumpster or they were all in the mountaintop. And now I do believe this roster is a little bit more level in terms of what we're going to see from a performance standpoint.
Absolutely. Well, it's going to be fun. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We'll kind of run this back maybe after Cubs convention, or if something else big happens. And then definitely once the season kind of gets rolling, we'll probably do this a little bit more frequently than we have in the past. Oh, and let's not forget about the Chicago Bears. My goodness. I guess we could say a quick word about that, but that was unfreaking believable. And the fact that the Bregman news dropped in the fourth quarter, you just couldn't write this better.
Right before that, dude, I had written the Bears off. Right. So I was at a concert. It was at the I Love the 90s concert. So I got to see CNC Music Factory, Young MC, Color Me Bad, and Vanilla Ice. And so,
quite the show in 1993.
Quite the lineup. And so I had the game on, listened to the second quarter on the drive home, or got home right at the end of the first half, right? The Bears were just, I tweeted out that it was an elite level of bumblefuckery, was what I called it. They kept going for fourth downs, shooting themselves in the foot, dropping passes, making dumb calls, dumb plays. And then you've got, and I said, like, they're often slow starters, but Caleb Williams in the second half, and I remember our conversation earlier, you did not believe Caleb Williams was the man. You did not, you had no.
Boy, let me tell you, that throw he made on 4th and 8 was a Michael Jordan dunk.
That was falling away. Whoop, money. But
it's insane.
Caleb in the fourth quarter and the Bears in the fourth, not just this fourth quarter. So here's the thing. So the Bears 6 times this season have trailed by 10 or more with less than 5 minutes in the fourth quarter. They are 3-3 in those games. The rest of the league is 3-158.
Oh my God. And here's the crazy thing is that, like, if you're a team playing them in the playoffs, like, you can't let up.
Right.
And the way the Bears their defense came out in the second half and just dominated. And I love hearing Matt LaFleur saying, well, we just couldn't get it going in the second half. The Bears shut you down. That's why.
Couldn't get it going.
You couldn't do anything.
Yeah, he had his balls removed.
Night and day.
Yeah, it was. And for me personally, that coming on the heels of Indiana University stomping a mud hole in the Oregon Ducks, that was the best. This is the best weekend of football I think I've ever experienced in my life. Just between that. IU has won more bowl games in the last 10 days than they had won in the previous 45 years. Right?
Yeah,
they are the consensus number one team. It looks like they are. There's some phenomenal content out there following all that stuff up. But it's just it's crazy to look at all this stuff and to see what the Bears have found out a way to do. I've said this many times though, it's like I think we'd all still rather see fourth quarter Caleb in the first 2 quarters, because if they could figure out a way to get things rolling out of the gate and not have to fight back from 10 plus points seemingly every game, that's going to be required of them. But man, was that that was wild. Like last night between that and the Bregman stuff, and I'm up here writing this stuff, and all of a sudden the Bears start authoring this comeback. You're like, oh, is this real life? So anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it was real. And it continues to be. So, yeah, going to be good stuff, man. The next few weeks, CubsCon coming up. When is CubsCon? Like next weekend?
Yeah, next Friday,
Yeah.
this coming Friday,
Next
Saturday, Sunday.
weekend, got the Bears
Yeah.
playing whenever they play. I don't even know. You got the national championship game. When is that?
That's
Monday?
next
No.
Monday, the 19th.
Next Monday. Got a lot going on here, man. It's going to be this is fun. It's a fun time to be a Chicago fan or just a Midwest fan, really.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. It's it is this last few days have been wild. So it's nice to have something to cheer for, and been having some fun with it. Kind of feel like we've goaded Jed Hoyer into doing some things, but I like
Yeah.
I like where it's
Well,
at.
at least he's shown us he's got the ability to do it.
Yeah, no, and
You really can't complain.
No,
going forward.
Not at this point.
Who will?
Well, someone will. It wouldn't matter what they did, right? You could find somebody out there who's going to bitch about anything, right? It doesn't even matter, just for the sake of it. But no, like I said, it'll be Cubs convention is definitely going to have a greater buzz around it than what it would have had it happened, a week ago, right? Had none of these things happened. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Cool. All right, everybody, look for this guy right here, because Evan's going to be at Cubs convention. I'm not going to be there, unfortunately, but going to be fun. We'll report back, maybe do some live stuff from CubsCon. Who knows? The world is our oyster. Until then,
See you.
Have a good Sunday.
Try.
Be real.